podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Humans of Speedway podcast. I'm Ian Brannan, and as the title would suggest, not only are we speaking to stars from on the track in this series, but also some of the people who make up the Speedway community. And my next guest shares similar interests really. He's Speedway author Jeff Scott, and around about 15 years ago, Jeff set himself the challenge of visiting every single track in the UK through a single season, travelling over 10,000 miles and taking in over 1,000 heats, and documented the tale in his book Showered in Shale. Since then, he's made a similar journey following the Speedway GP series across Europe, as well as many other books looking into the history and people in Speedway. And he's also going to pick, using all that knowledge, his ultimate meeting as well. What would be the ultimate track, and who would be the riders from all of that vast experience? Welcome to Humans of Speedway, Jeff Scott.
Hello, Ian. Nice to be on the show.
It's great to have you here. Now, you have completed the ultimate Speedway road trip. Probably a lot of Speedway fans have dreamt about doing this, or had the idea in a pub one night. It'd be great to go to all the different Speedway tracks in the country and follow it for the whole season. You actually did it. How did it all come about?
Sort of back in the midst of time, in the middle of the noughties, say 2005, I went round to every single existing Speedway track in the country at that point to sort of, see how things worked. Obviously, being a fan of Speedway, that was an exciting prospect to go looking at all the different clubs and tracks. I also wanted to really look into what made Speedway what it is. It's more a philosophical question about what is Speedway, what does it mean to people, who are the people involved behind the scenes, what do they get up to, why do they go? I mean, something I've noticed from my own casual observation as being a fan is lots of different people do lots of different tasks within Speedway, some of which don't appear overly glamorous, say, for example, like raking the track or running the turnstiles. And yet people seem to do that for years and years and years, which obviously gives them access to their local club, but at the same time does seem to give them a level of involvement that leads them to appear sort of from the outside, sort of relatively content with life and the world. So a lot of people spend a lot of their time striving to find happiness or contentment through sort of romance, wealth, career, whatever it is. And yet down at the Speedway track, some of which aren't overly prepossessing, it seems a whole series of people working voluntarily found a great deal of satisfaction in that. So I think that's one of the attractions of the Speedway community, but that was what first got my curiosity, really. So I kind of thought already that would be the case at most tracks, but unless you go and see things for yourself, and while one swallow doesn't make a summer, you do get a better perspective on things. Once I'd done it once, I actually went back quite a few times to those tracks over the years.
Let's talk about some of your adventures then, because the book that I actually have in my hand is one of yours from a little while ago. It's called Showered in Shale, and this is you going around all the British tracks through the course of the season. Now, what are the stories that stand out in your mind of the people you've met? Because as you say, this is a book where you are speaking to the real people at each track. You're seeing the lady who works in the burger bar, the guy on the turnstile, the people raking the tracks. It's about the whole experience that you encountered, isn't it?
Well, it is, and it's also about all the fans with their stories. So when I started out doing the book because I sort of failed as a poet, and my poetry teacher, the late Michael Donaghy, said, basically, you're a terrible poet. He put it a bit more politer than that, but you should do something that you have, a personal interest in, that means something to you, that you have a genuine curiosity about, and when you go and look into that, you'll probably write a lot better, was more or less what he was saying. I mean, whether I did or didn't is open to question, but I think I've certainly written quite a few words, a couple of million or so, or maybe more than that, of which I always say about 3 are any good, and most people could agree with me on that. So I started traveling around. I thought, well, I'll go to every track in the country.
So having visited all the tracks in the country, and obviously this was back 2005, so some of those tracks are different now, but which was your favourite if you had to pick one? There must be one.
That's a very tricky question, Ian, in that obviously picking favourites isn't good among your children, and it's certainly not good. Not good.
There's many factors that play into it, I suppose, aren't there?
There are. Well, you could say that, Ian, and I couldn't possibly comment. But if I did, I would say, looking to truly distinctive sort of experiences, I would say I'd strangely go to, say, the Isle of Wight and stand on bends 3 and 4. They've got you used to be able to access, maybe they've changed it. They've got a very entrepreneurial promoter down there, Barry Bishop, nowadays. But in the sort of Pav and Crouch era, you could go behind the sort of pits area as public access, and you could stand on a sort of bit of sort of derelict ground with flowers growing on it. And that's one of the few banked tracks, or was at the time, in the UK. Got kind of a steep camber to it. And you can stand on the bank and watch the riders come at incredible speed down the straight and into that corner. Speedway is obviously called Speedway, and nowadays with highly tuned bikes, there is a great emphasis put on speed, which I think perhaps is to the detriment of the spectacle and to the riders' bank balances, but not to the tuners. But if you want sheer speed, then, I mean, for example, Peterborough is incredibly exciting to watch the speed that riders get up to. I mean, obviously, famously, we say riders get up to 60 and 70 miles an hour on bikes without brakes. But if you look at the track records and the distance of the tracks, that's perhaps a little bit oversold. So let's say at some of the bigger tracks, maybe they get to 50. I don't know. I once went on a Speedway bike at Sittingbourne, and when I was doing about 10 miles an hour, it felt like I was doing 1,000 miles an hour. So
it's petrifying, I imagine. It's just, it's easy to sit there and talk about it as a fan, I suppose, isn't it? But then when you actually realise what's underneath you, I think it's frightening.
Well, my main achievement that day was not ending up in a wheelchair. That was my starting position on the day. And it was a referee's day, weirdly. And you start on a little practice track, which has got, I mean, the key injury you get, I think, is you get splinters, because there's just no way the bike is just drawn to a wooden fence. And you spend the whole time clinging to the fence and unable really to turn the corners. But by the time I graduated to the big track, I thought I was flying along at goodness knows what speed, with the wind would have been blowing through my hair if I didn't have a crash helmet on. You had the sort of vibration of the bike, which felt like you were going to get sort of white finger like you get if you use a pneumatic drill. So it felt incredibly exhilarating. And then I stood on the side next to the trainer, and we watched some person go around at about 3 miles an hour. And I said to them, well, at least I didn't go as slowly as that. And then they didn't reply. And I thought, well, God, maybe I was going that slow. But anyway, it did feel very fast. And if you want to get that sheer impression of speed, a track like Peterborough or on the banking there at the Isle of Wight is good. I mean, personally, I like the back straight at Somerset, which gives you the chance to do two things at once. I mean, it's a bit like going to watch Fulham Football Club, where you could watch on one day the boat race and a football game, if you were lucky enough. And if you go to Somerset, you can see very good racing at Somerset. It's one of the newer tracks, as we all know. It's developed by a local family, the Hancocks, on farmland. But it's a great track to go and watch meetings at. It's got a banked back straight, but on the back straight, not only can you look down one side and see the racing, but in the gaps between the racing or the track grading or whatever else is going on, you can look in the other direction and look at traffic jams on the M5. And I don't know about you, but I mean, there is a great pleasure to be had in watching other people in a traffic jam, particularly if perhaps they have a caravan with them.
Yeah. It's certainly a unique selling point that no other club offers. I mean, I go to Somerset and the Cardiff weekend, like so many people do for the championship pairs as it is now, and it's always a great experience. It's a nice club. It's very welcoming, as you say, but and quite different from so many other clubs as well in terms of its surroundings. And if you're lucky enough to get a decent night, it's a perfect place to watch Speedway, really. Yeah,
and well, looking at back straights, I mean, the back straight at Berwick is very good too, because you've got I wouldn't stand under a stand, because if you stand under a stand, it amplifies the noise of the bikes as they go round. In a sort of era where we've got better silencers nowadays, perhaps you want to get that retro feel, you want a bit more noise, so standing under a roof and amplifying the sound's what you want to do. But at Berwick, you've got it's another banked track. Yeah, it's just one of those great points to watch from. I mean, genuinely as a fan, it's hard to quibble with the experience at almost any club. I don't want to appear too rose-tinted glasses about the whole thing, but there are real pleasures at any club. I mean, I really liked going to Stoke Speedway. Stoke Speedway's got a sort of main grandstand area overlooking the track. It's got a unique back straight where people in their cars sit and watch the meeting from their cars, which I've never kind of understood. A bit like, say, when you go to pool and you watch from behind glass because it's a greyhound
Yes.
track. It's sort of, I don't know, sort of like, I don't want to say maybe sex with the condom's fun, but perhaps it's better without. and think Speedway from behind glass or in your car. It's tricky to salute the riders when they come around on their lap of honour from a car. So what they do there is they flash their headlights, or if they're really keen, they wash their window and move their windscreen wipers, which I've got to say is one of the great ways to acknowledge you're winning, a good performance by a rider.
Jeff, in the era of social distancing, that could be the way forward.
Well, maybe we need tracks where you can park up in the car. I mean, obviously, Speedway is going to say it's an outdoor sport. We can welcome people along and we can do everything safely. But I mean, the key aspect of that is all the touch points as you go, as you pay, or as you go to the loo, or as you go to the track shop or whatever. So while there's the space to distance people, there's perhaps all those shared points, which is something that have to be accommodated when we do get running again. But tracks where they could park in their cars, which there aren't so many of, that would be a fabulous way to see it. And obviously you could bring your own sandwiches. And I mean, Speedway people love to bring their own sandwiches, except at clubs that ban them. And their own, I mean, you can't really go to Speedway without a whole set of accessories. I think a garden chair, a flask, Tupperware containers with your own sandwiches and foil. Obviously your program board. I mean, I think there has been a problem with the rise of the modern program going to a bigger format in some places because it's often made the program board redundant. Then equally as going back to when I started watching at Reading, you have your own homemade program board, that you sort of maybe make in your woodwork class and then varnish. And if you were a Reading Racers fan, you'd stick on your free Reading Racers Gulf Oil sticker on the back, and you'd have little things to hold your pen like sort of officious men have in their top pocket of their shirts when you see them when you get in trouble with people elsewhere.
I can go one further than that, because when I was at school, a guy who was one of the woodwork teachers, he was also a big Bradford fan, and he was knocking out these wooden football rattles, and he was selling them at the track shop at Bradford. And so you go, and there were these football rattles throughout the whole crowd, and we knew that it was the teacher at school that had made them all. And suddenly he started upgrading his car.
Yeah, well, that's good moonlighting. Well, my granddad was a carpenter, but that's good moonlighting, because what you can do with offcuts or the time, the skill required to make such a thing. I mean, now you've mentioned rattles, it is kind of a strange thing about Speedway in that, I mean, I'm sure they did exist, but I was thinking ahead for this chat. I can't remember if there were air horns in 1975. I've got a feeling there were, but definitely there were rattles. There were sort of Speedway scarves. Obviously, the Speedway badge has got a very long tradition. Not that you can make a noise with the badge unless you stick someone with the pin.
Well, yeah, and those with the bars under it for the years as well.
Exactly. I mean, again, going around the country, I saw people with sort of so many badges on their back that, definitely if they went near a magnet, they'd be in trouble, but they could barely walk with the sort of installed weight of their history. Equally, there were the car sticker. That's another big one. There was a chap at Eastbourne called Sid Shine, who, when you used to overtake him on the motorways going back from meetings, he was perhaps of that sort of age where he was doing, say, 55 in the middle lane. But he was in a small car that was filled with stickers throughout the back window. So his visibility level was poor anyway. And you would beep and wave in acknowledgement. But I think he was used to so many people beeping, he never really looked up to see that you knew him. But again, the Speedway sticker, I went to Bewley or whatever that you always saw as a kid. People had Speedway stickers in those days, didn't they? And
Yeah.
and
I did.
sewn on badges,
Body jackets.
Yeah.
You get them in the shop. There's an early picture of me riding my first bike with a Halifax Dukes body jacket on, and it wasn't just a piece of plastic either. It was like a properly made one.
Well, I mean, of course, nowadays the anorak of choice has to be like the Wolf Sport anorak, which I think is made from a sort of, at the time, it was probably made from a sort of synthetic material that was part of the UK space program, in that it would keep people warm on the moon, and or perhaps safe in a nuclear accident. But ultimately, these things are going to resist any sort of form of decomposition in sort of landfill, ignoring that people wear them for years with great pride. But they have very distinctive designs, but they've sort of supplanted the sort of more bring your own, make your own sort of ethos of the early 70s, going back to it as being my heyday, that people had at that point. I mean, I grew up living around the corner from a Hell's Angel, so I was always kind of au fait with badges and gleaming bikes. But when I went to Speedways, when I got to see them properly in action, for the first time in a sort of glamorous setting. And I can go to the tracks I went to in a second, but returning to my sort of first impressions, I mean, it's a sort of an assault on the senses, isn't it, Speedway? There's the sound, there's the speed. I mean, they say that speed is the sort of the most common concept of the sort of 20th century, the sort of idea of velocity, the idea of being able to travel distances and so on. And Speedway has it as a microcosm where you get the sort of intensity of the minute, the sound of the bikes, the smell of the fuel and methanol. The smell of methanol has changed nowadays, but and sadly you can't smell it as much. I believe that's because it's more made from a synthetic compound nowadays rather than perhaps being more vegetable based as it was in the past. On my travels, if I had £1 for every time someone said to me, I don't know if I'd like to read your books, but if you were selling methanol eau de cologne, I'd buy some. I mean, personally, if they were wearing methanol eau de cologne, you'd be tempted to strike a match if they weren't buying your. And of course, methanol burns without flames, doesn't it? Because that's always a peculiar thing where you see someone running around like they've got wasps down their knickers. But in fact, it's because the bike's on fire, but you can't see it. I mean, that is one of the great sights, isn't it? Flame-free bikes being put out by fire extinguishers. It's not something you see a lot. And then equally,
so unique, yeah. Don't the Indy cars in America, don't they run on methanol? Or is it the NASCAR? They certainly used to, I think, yeah.
Well, I think the IndyCar 500, because I think BSI, the runners of the Speedway Grand Prix, like to claim they invented the air fence. But when Nigel Mansell was riding over there in 94 and 95, they had air fences then by the pit wall, didn't they? So, I mean, that's another thing that's changed in Speedway, obviously the concept of safety. Thinking back to Smallmead in 1976 or 1977, the year or two after I got au fait and familiar with how everything was going. I mean, Speedway in lots of ways was one of my first ever interactions with foreigners, or at least people with foreign names. They rode for the club, but then equally, Reading would ride against Russia, in a friendly, or Gorzhov would come over and ride. So you had all these Eastern European people coming over with their more dilapidated bikes, and they would smash into the fence, rip down, say, 30 yards of it, and then pull their bikes out of it and sort of not ride on because they've been excluded. But, there was a certain more sort of rough and ready nature to the thing that you don't really... You don't quite see so much in an air fence era, which is good for the riders, and we wouldn't want anyone to get injured because, a lot of riders have paid very big prices for our entertainment, and, something that can happen in a split second can have consequences for a lifetime and badly impair the quality and enjoyment of their lives just for our entertainment. So, I don't want to make light of people crashing, but equally when the Russians and the Poles came over, they did seem to spend a lot of time skirting with the fence. Maybe it was the small bijou nature of Smallmead Stadium, I don't know.
You're listening to the Humans of Speedway podcast. I'm Ian Brannan, and my guest is Speedway author Jeff Scott in this episode. And before we finish, Jeff is going to put together his ultimate meeting, and he's got a lot of experience because he's travelled to all of the tracks in Great Britain. But not only that, it's been all around Europe as well, following the GP series. And let's just talk about that for a moment. When I see some of the tracks abroad, I'm particularly thinking of some of the ones in Sweden where they seem to have an array of concession stalls and they sit on bankings and wooden benches. And what are those sort of stadiums like from your experience?
I've been to 2 years, 2 whole series worth of the Speedway Grand Prix. So I've been to all the tracks they have, and that often appears to be something like a sort of Duke of Edinburgh award scheme where they test your compass skills and your ability to get to remote locations in the middle of nowhere in various sort of obscure newly European countries. But looking at Sweden, I think, again, I don't want to culturally stereotype, but there is a sort of more community nature, or, people don't really try and stand out as the big I am in Sweden, I don't think, or Denmark. There's a very much, everybody's roughly at the same sort of level. So a typical, as judged by the Speedway Grand Prix tracks, and I'd love to go around to all the tracks in Sweden, they tend to be in a forest. They tend to be built with rain in mind, because I don't think they're short of rain over there. And it has sort of more modest benching. I think it has a different range of shops. Last year when I was in Melilla, they confiscated my water as I went in. And I said, well, what shall I do for a drink? And the security man said, the water is so pure here you can drink from the toilet. And while that didn't seem quite what I had in mind, it was a good suggestion. I think the biggest innovation I saw food-wise in Sweden was, again, at Melilla, where they're selling the chips and the burgers, and then they have they were almost right in Speedway colour terms. They have like 4 udders hanging down. So in one, you've got tomato ketchup, the red one, you've got a white one for mayonnaise, and you've got the yellow one for mustard. And if they'd had an extra blue one, that would have just been perfect. But again, I don't suppose blue cheese dressing or whatever, that would have to be in that. I don't know if it'd be that popular. I can't imagine there's many Speedway fans that like blue cheese, really. That's just a guess. Looking, say, at Poland, I mean, everyone talks about how wonderful, Poland is a league on, that everyone's attracted to, the riders, from a finance and sponsorship point of view, but also from a crowd point of view. And I mean, all Polish football clubs, Speedway clubs, given the nature of sort of Eastern Europe and sort of Iron Curtain countries, Soviet bloc countries, there was a lot of sort of community pride in your club. So if you were the state or the local council would invest in their Speedway stadia and give it to their football club or rent it out at bargain rates to people. So I think we talk about why don't we emulate what's happening in Poland, but we sort of misunderstand the sort of ownership basis of the stadiums, because in the UK, we've always been sort of adventitiously involved with greyhound tracks, rugby league tracks, and so on. The Reading club historian, Arnie Gibbons, has got a very good theory about looking at the rise greyhounds arriving in the country in 1962 as one of the big drivers of new Speedway tracks, because you can't run greyhounds every night, so you need events to subcontract to use to maximise the use of the stadium. But coming back to more to your question, I mean, I think there's a certain shared language and vernacular of Speedway, irrespective of the language that's spoken. I do think at a club level, I'm not so sure at sort of more a glamorous, big international event level, because that attracts a different type of audience, although still an older audience. I think at a club level, there is very much, there doesn't seem to be too much difference. When I went to Germany, where I went to a couple of locations there seems to be a real thing of bringing your own swimming float along. And you think, well, that's a weird thing. But it turns out that they don't really have much seating. They tend to have sort of more rough vacuum stepped terraces. So anyone in their right mind is going to bring their own swimming float, or a deluxe version with sort of handles on the side.
Got you. Yeah.
Garden furniture, you can't really go wrong with that anywhere. If you go to Hallstavik in Sweden, it seems to be set in some sort of, I don't know, maybe a Game of Thrones. They could stage that there. It's very rocky, outcroppy sort of place, where again, comfortable things to sit on is really the way to go. Waterproof clothing is always good at any Speedway meeting, I think.
Yeah. But I think what we're discovering there is that the wherever you go in Speedway, you're never going to be going far wrong if you take some garden equipment with you.
No, and although you see again, there's because it's more egalitarian, I think, in a funny way in Sweden or some Scandinavian and Nordic countries. Again, to just talk in cliches. And when you go into Melilla, even though I think for example, at the Grand Prix, it's rained at everyone bar one, and yet they've still managed to stage them all bar one due to the great drainage of the track. But they confiscate your umbrellas as you go in. And yet, while nothing's cheap in Sweden, they sell very good sort of Kagul Pacamax that you can get for about the equivalent of £2. So we can all, in different colours as well, depending on your colour choice. And we can all sit there in sort of very bovine fashion, getting soaked in the rain, waiting for something to happen, wearing bargain Kaguls. And, you know, maybe that could be the way forward for British Speedway, bargain Kaguls, I don't know.
Knockdown Kaguls could be get them branded by Wolf Sport.
Well, exactly. I don't know if Wolf Sport are the future. I mean, the riders nowadays have sort of got a little bit fancier and having their own logos and numbers, as if, you know, it's sort of like some sort of druid ceremony, isn't it, with all the numbers the riders have, or a sort of complicated trigonometry problem. And maybe that does get mind share when your number, you know, whatever. I mean, the only number that springs to anyone's mind, I think, is Jason Doyle's number.
Yes. Okay. And on that note, this is the Humans of Speedway podcast. I'm Ian Brannan. I'm joined by author Jeff Scott, who's got lots of experience of visiting every Speedway track there is in Britain and increasingly more across Europe as well. And right now it's time to come up with your Speedway Paradise, where we design your ultimate meeting in the ultimate location with the ultimate people. And with all your knowledge, this should be pretty straightforward. So your first question, Jeff, which track would you be holding it on? Which bit of Shale?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the UK, we can all pick the obvious best track at the moment would be Bellevue, which I think is a fabulous track to watch Speedway at. But again, you've got to sort of, I think you've always got to dance with the person who brought you. So I'm going to pick, even though it wouldn't be everyone's choice, Smallmead, the track at Smallmead, because that was my first experience of Speedway. I didn't know any different. That, you know, fired my imagination and a lifelong love of the sport.
Okay, Smallmead for the track then. And which stadium would Smallmead's track go in for this event?
As it's nowadays just been razed to the ground and it's a car park. I mean, strangely, I'd probably put it in Smallmead Stadium circa 1975, I'm afraid to say. If that's probably a little bit boring of me. But to maybe approach the question slightly differently, something that, again, doing my books is perhaps something I got familiarity with because I had to find all these Speedway tracks. But I would say, I don't know about you, but if you commute a lot in a car, you get to sort of like certain sections of the UK motorway and detest other sections. Mm-hmm. Yet the drive to Speedway, I think, almost irrespective of which club you're going to, I think a lot of people do drive to go rather than on a bus or public transport because they're not so amenable to those things in the UK, although some tracks are. I think the anticipation you get going there is something, you know, really quite notable about the sport. And I've always been a Reading Racers fan, but obviously they shut down, and because of where I moved to, Eastbourne became my adopted club, and I've been going there many years. And generally, one of the most beautiful drives, just from a driving point of view, is through the countryside in the last, say, 5 miles towards Arlington Stadium. You know, the bluebells are out at a certain time of year, they're high hedges, it's sort of bucolic country roads. And yet the idea when you get there, you're going to watch some sort of harum-scarum, thriller-minute type meeting, I think is all part of the experience. So it's important that the track is the stage on which it's set. and the stadium is the surroundings in which you enjoy it. But the drive there is very significant. And obviously the drive back, unless you get caught behind an old age pensioner, which there can be quite a few leaving the Speedway Stadium. Obviously everyone drives quicker on the way home. Having just been to the Speedway, everyone comes out like a sort of bat out of hell.
Clutch starts out of the car park.
Yeah, well, yeah, if you can. I must honourably mention, when you're saying where would I set it, I do think Eastbourne is a fabulous location. But again, I can't tell whether that's the innate quality of the thing or my familiarity, but I've had many enjoyable evenings there. Speedway in darkness under lights, or as dusk falls, or whatever, being in the country. Yeah, there's something sort of timeless about it.
A fuse between all of those three, then.
There we are. So sorry not to answer it accurately.
How about the team then? If you were to pick an all-time 1 to 7, what would be the names?
Yeah, now this is sort of, I don't want to appear like a sort of only going for the show ponies, but obviously I'm going to have to say my first sort of rider that was thrilling to see was Anders Michenek, so he has to be in the team.
Yeah.
Picking an Eastbourne rider, there was genuinely no rider in my era of watching Speedway at Eastbourne who was more exciting to watch than Martin Dugard. And weirdly, though, the most exciting meeting I ever saw Martin Dugard in was the one where he was the wild card at Coventry in a Grand Prix and won. That was genuinely amazing. Another rider, so that's 2. Another rider has to be the most box office rider of his generation, so that has to be Nicky Pedersen. And again, when he used to come down to, when he rode for Wolves and against Eastbourne, I mean, he really took no prisoners. And there is something exciting about sort of riders in a certain part of their career, I think. And he could cause an argument in the phone box, it seems. And people would not remain indifferent to him being on the track. And it is important to say, obviously, people say, oh, he's a dirty rider, but it's a bit like the definition of an alcoholic, which an alcoholic is someone who drinks the same amount as you, but you don't like them. And a dirty rider is very much in the eyes of the beholder. I think he is perhaps aggressive on the track, but as a spectator, I mean, obviously we're not riding, that makes for a fabulous experience. If you were looking perhaps for the sort of Pele or Maradona or Eusebio, and again, I've only watched since 1975, so I don't know that much really about Speedway. I mean, Thomas Golob has to be, just, I think, on most people's lists. But as I say, it sounds like I'm only choosing top.
Well, no, I mean, there's no points limit. So it's your all-time team that you would love to see together. And so far we've got Michenek, Dugard, Pedersen and Golob. It's looking pretty strong. Yeah,
and then the next, my other 3, I'm going to say I think there's a certain point in a rider's career. There's certain, throughout all the years when I went around writing those books, went around to all the tracks, I would try and time it so that I could go and watch the up-and-coming rider of that year. So there's certain, in every year, there's a couple of riders, I think, in Britain, and I'm sure it's the same in Sweden and Poland, who are just sort of young, they're experienced enough to be sort of thrilling to watch, and they're sort of young enough still to be daredevil. And you would just almost travel, huge distances to watch them. So although he won't make my 1 to 7, I mean, Lewis Bridger around Weymouth was brilliant to watch. I mean, that's Conference League at the time. He was sort of young and wild and whatever. He was very exciting to watch. I think the Isle of Wight attracted exciting riders. I think Jason Doyle was very exciting when he was there. He also wouldn't be in my 1 to 7. But so I'm going to say the riders that were really, you would pay good money to watch when they were sort of in their youthful pomp. And I think that's often the time when riders are at the most exciting, would be Chris Holder, who was fabulous, I think. And then, strangely, because Australia suddenly appeared to have a great production line of these things, I would also choose Darcy Ward. Darcy Ward was also worth the proverbial admission money on his own. I didn't see him in his later years when he was at Poole or whatever, or even watch him that much on the Grand Prix. But when he was starting out, his sort of Kings Lynn thing, I mean, Kings Lynn was like a sort of mecca for watching Speedway, wasn't it? And it is a very well-run club, I think. And then Ty Woofenden was amazing to watch both at Scunthorpe and even at Rye House.
Yeah.
So I think you follow your clubs, but when you're sort of a neutral, if you go to a meeting and you've got no skin in the game in terms of supporting the club, certain riders just sort of grab you by the collar at a certain stage of their career and lead you around by it. So I could pick a side of a team of more worthy riders and more interesting riders maybe, but all of those have something to recommend them. And I would pick definitely Wardholder and Woofenden for a certain era of their careers.
It's a strong team, is that, isn't it? Yeah. Michenek, Dugard, Nicky Pedersen, Thomas Golub, Chris Holder, Darcy Ward, Ty Woofenden. I think in their prime, I don't think anybody would beat that.
I mean, that is a bit sort of like, mind you, all teams fundamentally are successful, I think, based on the sort of backroom engine of these things. So if you were looking at, say, an Eastbourne team of a certain era, David Norris was a very exciting rider. Dean Barker, Adam Shields, at a certain point, he was very exciting to watch at the Isle of Wight. He was at Eastbourne. He's a sort of, when he got to a sort of elite league, he was sort of seemed to be less tough on people, but in the Premier League, he took no prisoners, did he? So, I mean, lots of riders. I think you're unlucky if you go to a meeting and someone doesn't stand out and catch your eye. So I think that's one of the joys about Speedway, that while the production line of British riders might not be coming through, that there is still I don't think Speedway has got better or worse. I think a thrilling Speedway race is a close contest between evenly matched riders rather than strung out like a line of washing. But even if it's strung out like a line of washing and you see some sort of young talent on a bike going through impossible gaps, that's thrilling. I mean,
exciting, isn't it?
The best race I think I've ever seen at Eastbourne maybe was Jason Crump and Nicky Pedersen. I don't think they had much, there wasn't much love lost between them, I don't think. And they rode handlebar to handlebar, sort of a sort of nobble on their hand grip apart from each other, overtaking and re-overtaking each other for 4 laps. I mean, truly, truly exhilarating.
For riders, I've said that they should name their ideal pit crew, their ultimate pit crew. But I guess you being a supporter, I'm going to change it slightly and open it up to the commentary box, because you'll need a commentator for this Speedway meeting of a lifetime, this fantasy event. Who is going to be calling the action for you?
I mean, I think if you look at all the people who do DVDs, there's some very distinctive, very good commentators out there. There's the late Bob Tasker, I thought was very good. I think Steve Girdwood has a very distinctive style of presentation. David Rose come on a long way. I think you could listen to him. Obviously, you've got Pete Ballinger and Ken Burnett. But the commentator that's really standing out, and particularly in this lockdown era, the best way to experience Speedway at the moment seems to be watch Edinburgh Monarchs TV, EMTV, where they pick and curate their meetings very well. And you get to listen to Mike Hunter, who does many tasks, many jobs at Edinburgh. And I think he would be my choice, because he mixes sort of knowledge, enthusiasm and insight and candor in a way that sort of supplements the action that doesn't sort of overwhelm it.
This one is a bit of a tricky one for you, but we're giving you the opportunity in your fantasy meeting to change one rule of Speedway. Now, if you could change one rule, what would it be?
That's a tricky one. Weirdly, if I was British Speedway, I would secede from being, I don't know if it's possible, secede from being managed by the FIM.
Right, okay.
And there we are, there's a random...
And do your own thing.
Well, I think there could be a case for saying that. This era of sort of the virus is going to change the way we do everything. So unless radical ideas are on the horizon, whether it's streaming meetings, changing the way the number of riders in a meeting, maybe the way clubs are constituted, how you get new riders coming through, unless everything's up for sort of analysis, fiddling with the team average limits or the colour helmets or the whatever might be being fiddled with, probably isn't going to attract the audience of the future. So I think going our own way, I'm not sure what benefits the FIM bring to British Speedway.
That is quite a big rule change, quitting the FIM, but there we have it. So on the rule book front, who would be the referee for this meeting then?
3 refs to share it together. They're all going to do 5 heats each if it's a British League meeting. Okay. Or if it's a Grand Prix, it's 23 heats. So I don't know. I mean, maybe they could have a sort of, whoever makes the best decisions could do the semi-final and the final. So I would choose Chris Durno, Chris Gay and Christina Turnbull. I would also give an honorary mention to, obviously, to Tony Steele. And I think there is a good case for asking who are the most famous vegetarians in Speedway apart from Tony Steele.
Who are the most famous vegetarians in Speedway?
Yeah, I mean, do we know of any vegetarian Speedway riders? I mean, they're all trying to diet their way to success now. But so I imagine quinoa is a bit more on people's menu than it used to be. But maybe Tony should get into sort of nutrition as well as being, the referee's referee.
Tony Steele has had a few mentions on this podcast in this particular category. He does seem to be a favourite, but he's never been mentioned as being a dietitian as well, so an extra string to his bow there. Final question for you, Jeff, then. Who would be the opposition for your team of all-stars in your ultimate meeting, then?
Well, funny enough, it would be a bit like a testimonial. It would have to be the Reading team of 1975, which I could name off the top of my head dead easy. So that would be Anders Michenek again, John Davis, Bent Jensen, Bernie Lee, good old Bernie Lee, Bob Humphries, Mick Bell and Richard May. So that team is, that's the best team that I could think of to race against them. And
they'll probably have home advantage as well.
Well, they would, yeah.
Well, I think all the makings there of a fantastic meeting, and it's been fascinating hearing some of your stories as well. I know you've got plenty more, so maybe we can catch up again another time. But my thanks to you, Jeff Scott.
Well, it's been very nice talking to you, Ian.
My thanks to Jeff Scott for joining me on this episode of the Humans of Speedway podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to check out more of Jeff's work, you can find all of his books at methanolpress.com. And of course, don't forget to check out the other episodes in this series, including chats with Nigel Pearson and Scott Nichols. And don't forget, you can give us a rating and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts as well. And you'll also get future episodes straight to your device. Plus, if you'd like to leave us a comment or suggest names you'd like to hear on future podcasts, it'd be great to hear from you too, and we'll see what we can do. Meanwhile, see you next time on Humans of Speedway.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this football season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of statistics, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and an enormous selection of players and stat options are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million football fans who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100 for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.